Welcome to Meshery's project office hours for KubeCon China 2021. We have 45 minutes of talking about my favorite project, Meshery. Before we do that, let's go around and introduce a few of our maintainers. So my name is Lee Calcote. I'm one of the Meshery maintainers. I'm fortunate to be joined by 3 others today. I lose count, but we're somewhere north of 10 maintainers for Meshery. And so with no further ado, allow me to let Asuko, Husseina, and Navendu introduce themselves. In that order.
Let me first.
Please.
Can you guys hear me all? Yep. My code name is Asuko Lee. I'm the maintainer of the lawyer file community and the Meshery community. And those community are welcoming community. And I will do my best for the community and after the.
Very good, very good. I actually, no one's counting, Asuko, but you're the longest standing maintainer on this call. Like, you've been around the project from, I don't know, from the beginning. Someone just asked me earlier, when did the project start? And it's a little bit deceiving on GitHub because it looks like it started in somewhere in 2018. And like, the reality is it's the first actual meaningful commits started in fall of 2019. So we're coming up on an anniversary sometime soon. And so anyway, Asuko's been here a real long time. We're fortunate to have benefited from a few of his talents around Helm. That's a technology that Meshery uses. Around Linkerd, and that's certainly a technology that Meshery uses and tries to help empower users with. And then I won't go through the rest of the list, but there's a list. So Husseina has also been around the project for quite some time. Husseina, do you want to say hi?
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Husseina Begum. I am currently maintaining Meshery CTL. I have been associated with Layer 5 Meshery from around a year back. So I initially started with Hacktoberfest 2020, and the community was very welcoming, and I found my interest in service meshes. So I stayed around. So.
And Husseina has, you have something of a networking background anyway.
Yes, yeah. I work with VMware's NSX product, which is VMware's core SDN product. So network is something I'm very interested in. Yeah,
that comes in quite handy. Turns out service meshes have a lot to do with networking, as Husseina well knows. So we are also joined by another Meshery maintainer, Navendu.
Hello everyone, so I'm Navendu. I'm also one of the Meshery maintainers, and it's exciting to be here. And yeah, let's get talking about Meshery.
Nice. Well, so by the way, for those that are in attendance, we are here because we're pumped about Meshery, pumped about service meshes and networking and the things we just said. There's a lot of other technologies involved in the Meshery project, by the way. But we're also here for you, which is to say, please interrupt as we go. Please raise your, ask your questions, choose to laugh at corny jokes or not, but certainly ask your questions. And then that way you can guide the discussion. Without questions, we'll probably step through all of what kind of Meshery is. We'll sort of intro it, we'll kind of deep dive into some areas. Do a demo or two, but please point out your areas of interest so that we focus on those. And so with that, I'll share a few slides, and actually we might have another Meshery maintainer in the audience. So we might want to ask Piyush Singaria to come on as a panelist while I bring up a slide or two. So Meshery is a recent entrant into the CNCF. It's currently at a sandbox level. Meshery is already known for a few things. It's known for a couple of things that you won't find anywhere else in the world. There's a couple of claims to fame, so to speak, about the project. One is like about the community a bit, and actually it just randomly happens that we have the collection of maintainers that we have on right now. What's nice is that there's a diverse group of individuals that are here, representing from independent contributors, users, folks that work at large tech companies, and folks that work at very small ones. And so, like, if we don't say it enough during today's presentation, jump into the project. It is whether you're using the project, want to contribute to it, or just be a fly on the wall, like just hang out and be a bystander, come and jump in. There's a lot of ways to engage. It isn't necessarily, or doesn't have to be about code. To talk about Meshery and intro it for just a moment, I'll say this, that, how many of you would take a guess as to how many service meshes there are out there? Like, there's probably more than you know of. And if anyone could name, well, shoot, more than 10, I'd be really impressed. If you could name over 20, I'll send you a t-shirt or something. There's more than 20. As a matter of fact, next year, we're going to see at least one more significant one at least. So it's not over. Like, it's going to get meshier. That's one of the things that Meshery attempts to do. Like, part of the genesis of the project was trying to help people embrace diverse infrastructure and be comfortable with any mesh that they wanted to choose. So to really help make that choice, to facilitate that choice, help people understand how service meshes work, help them be confident and comfortable in operating them, and to give them choice around the service mesh with higher level tooling. Beyond that sort of horizontal functionality about supporting, what are we at? I think we're at like 10 service meshes right now. Meshery also does, or is working toward doing the things that you see in this green section, in this management plane. So Meshery layers on top of one or multiple of any of those 10 service meshes. So Meshery has 10 service mesh adapters. Some of those adapters get used more than others, but irrespective, Meshery tries to provide a fairly uniform experience, and one that provides some of the things that you see here in this management plane, but also provide things like, well, configuration best practices. Like, are you doing it right? Are you configuring your mesh well or not in accordance with best practices? There are a certain number of best practices built into different Meshery adapters, and Meshery will do a static analysis, and, well, not just a static analysis, but a runtime analysis of your environment, and let you know if you're doing it right or you're doing it wrong. Because there are any number of service meshes, there's a couple of specifications that have come out in the ecosystem. So there's two of them that we'll talk about today. You might be familiar with them or you might not be. One of them is Service Mesh Interface, or SMI. If you're familiar with SMI, Service Mesh Interface, it's a set of API abstractions. It's a set of currently 4 specifications that define a common way of addressing service mesh functionality. So that uniform way of interacting with any service mesh, you can imagine that SMI and its mission is really well aligned with Meshery and its mission. And so the two go hand in hand in this regard, so much so that Meshery is used as a conformance tool to validate whether or not each individual service mesh, there's either 6 of them or 8 of them that have implemented against SMI. Meshery works as a conformance tool in that regard, which is great for helping ensure confidence around ongoing compatibility to the extent that that you as a user are interfacing with SMI and its APIs. Meshery, so as I skip around slides here, let me say this, that we talked about just briefly like what a management plane might be and some of the functionality that it might have. So like as a random example, continuous delivery. You're likely familiar with the fact that a service mesh and the intelligence that it offers can help facilitate like canary deployments or splitting traffic or doing any number of things with requests, any number of things with traffic that flow across the mesh. Well, one of those things can be helping facilitate continuous delivery. Near is like I try to stay up to speed as possible, so I believe that this is very accurate. That none of the service meshes today, none of their control planes, directly have a construct or have a feature called continuous delivery, like that that have a canary feature like directly that lets you configure it and they orchestrate the canary. The service meshes themselves absolutely facilitate doing a canary and facilitate traffic splitting and traffic shifting and collecting metrics and other telemetric signals so that you can operate and implement a canary. I call that out as just like a random example of something that's not fully, it's something that's provided for by a service mesh, but not fully implemented by a service mesh. So a management plane or other tools, like a popular tool in the space, something like Flagger, can help facilitate, can use the power of a service mesh to perform these things. Meshery's appetite, Meshery's roadmap is quite large in that regard. So certainly like facilitating a canary is part of what Meshery intends to do. Meshery has, does a lot of orchestration and will soon have its own workflow engine. Okay, so if you take kind of another look at that, Meshery itself, it'll and by the way, I'm gonna stop speaking here in a minute so not everyone has to listen to me for so long. Meshery will deploy in Kubernetes cluster, or it will deploy out of Kubernetes cluster on like a Docker host. Either way, Meshery and its architecture, it comes with, let's go down here. It comes with an operator, a Kubernetes operator. And so when you connect Meshery to Kubernetes, it will automatically deploy an operator. Inside the operator is a couple of controllers, and one of those is called MeshSync. MeshSync facilitates ongoing discovery and synchronization, ongoing discovery of service meshes that you might already have, and synchronization of that information back and forth to Meshery. Meshery it does lifecycle management of service meshes, so it'll provision and configure each of these service meshes in a greenfield way, so it'll do that fresh, or it will discover existing service mesh deployments that you have. So this is kind of what a simple deployment might look like. There's one Meshery adapter per service mesh. Another component to Meshery's architecture is this concept of providers. We'll talk about those. Another is the fact that Meshery has 2 APIs. So it has a REST API and a GraphQL API. Meshery server, the component here. And Meshery has, as a project, has 2 of its own clients, a command line client and a user interface client, a UI. We'll get into both of those in a bit as well. We'll probably also talk about the ability to script around Meshery's API. And so Navendu might talk to us about some GitHub actions that have come out of the project Husseina might talk to us about some of what Meshery CTL does and how it gets used. She might also dip into Meshery UI. So one other, there's maybe two other things that I will try to quickly impart as concepts, and then I'll pull back and maybe we'll take a look at some of these. Maybe we'll start to show Meshery and kind of poke around it. So three other concepts briefly. If you're at all familiar with WebAssembly and the notion that WebAssembly filters can be written, WebAssembly programs can be written as Envoy filters. That's a thing, and Meshery orchestrates those or helps dynamically insert WebAssembly filters into any Envoy-based data plane. There's a lot of service meshes that have chosen Envoy as their data plane proxy. The project has, I don't know if it's like 6 of those that come out of the box, somewhere around there today. And it's extensible for you to just add your own as well. There's another concept of Meshery that I consider really neat. And there's been a lot of effort around this recently. And it's this notion of helping users, helping people understand the common patterns of usage of a service mesh and whether or not you're doing it right, whether or not, how is your neighbor doing it? What are these architectural patterns? How are people deploying them? Where are they being successful? How do you know if your performance is doing well? How do you know how sensitive to set your circuit breaker? Like, what are other people doing? How many retries should you have between different services? Like, the answers to each of these are generally like a massive, it depends. It depends on it depends on like a number of things that are specific to your environment. But what the community has focused on is identifying common patterns of use, common features across service meshes, and then and explaining them, and then making them available as importable patterns that you can load into Meshery, and then have Meshery deploy those, and then eventually then have Meshery verify whether or not you're in compliance or still running infrastructure, whether or not your infrastructure has drifted from that pattern. Some of the technology that's used here is some of the same technology that underpins the Crossplane project, if you're familiar with that. Meshery just takes a very deep look at service meshes. There's a very emergent catalog of these coming out. So if you go to meshery.io, the project site, there's an early collection of what some of these are going to look like, what they do, and to grab copies of them and basically import them into Meshery. This is yet to be announced, so don't tell anyone yet, I guess. Okay. More to say about this concept of patterns and trying to help people get started and quickly and then operate their service mesh easily. Part of that is plugins that are being developed for Meshery, like the screenshot that's here. We'll probably take a look at Mesh Map at some point and show you how you can visually design. You can import these patterns and then modify them to suit and visually design. The last thing I'll say is that Meshery has a sibling project. It actually has a few sibling projects, maybe only one of which we'll speak to. There's an upcoming open project office hours in about 40 minutes or so on service mesh performance. It's a sibling project to Meshery. It is a specification project. It is an abstraction, a service mesh abstraction. It's a standard way of capturing and characterizing the performance of, well, most prominently of a service mesh, but also subsequently of cloud native infrastructure and how well that infrastructure is performing. So some of the maintainers from CADA have been quite interested in the project for their auto scaling purposes and understanding the performance of various cloud native infrastructure. More to say, go attend those project hours, but Meshery implements this specification and as such provides a uniform way of measuring performance. There. with that, did we miss any questions? And is it time to let Husseina or Navendu or someone else take the reins and kind of talk about Meshery a bit?
Surely, I think we have a question in chat. So there's a question that whether Meshery can work with multi-CNIs like Calcio or CubeOVNs.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's, well, this is a kind of a fun one in that, yes, is a most straightforward answer. Yes, and it depends upon what the service mesh supports. So, maybe using Istio as an example, you got a little bit of choice there about some people have used eBPF as part of the data plane for Istio. Some other folks have used a CNI approach. There's been kind of over the history of Istio as a project, kind of different approaches to how the data plane is implemented. Meshery cares, but only to the extent that when mesh sync runs and interrogates the currently deployed Istio, examines it and understands that Istio's capabilities, it's at that point that Meshery cares as it pulls back that information to say, this Istio is capable of these things. And then Meshery works to bubble up the ability to configure, like to the extent that Istio as a control, like using Istio as an example, that control plane were to allow you to configure and operate the mesh differently based on that data plane implementation, then Meshery bubbles it up. And that might sound like magic sauce to some of you, some magic sprinkles and sort of hand wavy, like, oh, it, if the service mesh does it, then, Meshery will, and it's like, no, it's not a hand wavy thing. Like, it's taken a lot of work to make that a true statement, what I just said. And it is true. Meshery will, at runtime and at time of discovery of your service mesh, generate new configurable components that describe the configuration options for that service mesh. Oh, it's been a long journey to get there. The adapters themselves, the Meshery adapters, they have quite clearly gone through a re-architecture. They are in their V2 with, like, there's no doubt. And that's actually somewhat similar for a couple of other components in Meshery. Meshery's been around for, like we were just talking about how long it's been around for. Some of the components have already been rewritten based on learnings, based on changes, based on new service meshes coming out, et cetera. So I think it's a really good question. And yeah, the other questions, or someone else that might like to share, like, share Meshery in action.
Surely. So as questions come in, maybe we can do a little bit of a demo for Meshery. So as you can see, this is the Meshery dashboard, and Meshery manages a lot of service meshes. So you can see, so I have Meshery Istio and Meshery Linkerd and Meshery App Mesh adapters currently on my Kubernetes cluster, but I can also have all the other service mesh adapters in my cluster as well. So Meshery automatically discovers the Kubernetes cluster it's in, and it also has a service discovery. So if you bring Meshery to a Kubernetes cluster that already has some service meshes installed in it, then it will automatically discover them, and yeah, you can just use Meshery from there itself. So mesh management plane, or even more service mesh management platform, lets you manage the lifecycle of all the different service meshes mentioned here. So you can go ahead and install a service mesh. You can even add some sample applications on your mesh to just run a couple of benchmark tests and to see how different service meshes work and contrast. And as we mentioned before, Meshery also validates the running configuration of your service meshes. So SMI being the specification that service meshes adhere to. So Meshery being the service mesh agnostic tool out there. So it validates SMI conformance of your service meshes. So I'll try to okay. So there are some problems with my cluster. So basically, you can also add these customized add-ons like Prometheus and Grafana and collect metrics from your service meshes. We also have these concepts of service mesh configurations. So Meshery patterns, as Lee pointed out earlier, offer a really configurable way for users to bring in their own service mesh configurations and apply them onto their service meshes directly. We also have a concept of WebAssembly filters. So users can bring in their own filters and use it to extend the capabilities of service meshes. Like for example, Istio has an Envoy control plane. So the Envoy VM supports WebAssembly filters out of the box. So you can bring in your own filters to the Envoy VM and like add more features on top of the service meshes. Another really great capability of these service meshes is the performance management capability of Meshery. So what you can see here is a set of automated tests that we run to benchmark different service meshes using Meshery. So if you go here and take a look at some of these results, you can see how different service meshes, or you can even go ahead and compare different service meshes and how they perform under different environments and what all these statistics are. We have a load generator within Meshery that runs these benchmark tests against deployed service mesh on the application, and you can collect metrics. You can also go ahead and add your own metrics, collect your own metrics from Prometheus and have a Grafana dashboard to display those metrics as well. And yep, that is a brief overview of what Meshery is and what Meshery does. And there are a couple of links in the chat where you can go ahead and check out Meshery and some of the other cool features. Lee, like, do you want to talk about some of the upcoming features that we have in this release and what we have cooking for the next release?
Yeah, I would really like to. Knowing me and how I'll just talk to you about Meshery for an hour, like hours. Before I talk about, like the current release, some of the features, the upcoming roadmap, we might give Husseina a chance to talk about the other Meshery client.
Yeah, sure. Let me share. Navendu has demoed the UI features, right? So let me talk about the CLI client. So hope you can see my screen.
Yep.
So for bringing up Meshery, initially we need to do this. I have the Meshery up and running, but I'll quickly show what I have done. I have started. If you don't have the repo locally, you can start with this command. It's a CLI command which is listed in the Meshery documentation quick start guide. So I'm running Meshery on Kubernetes platform. So you can check the status of Meshery by using system status command. So Meshery is up and running and it is at this endpoint. So let me go there and access this. So it would take me to the same UI what Navendu was showing. So it detected that I am running a Kubernetes cluster. So I also have these service meshes installed. So let me quickly show the performance test that I have already run. So these can be triggered from the UI as well as from the CLI. So let's first check the syntax of the commands that we can use with performance. One is profile. So whatever profiles are listed here, we can even check it from here. So I have 3 profiles already created and some tests run under it. So that can be shown from here. I can also create a profile from here using Meshery CTL client. So the syntax, we can get it. 1 second. I have the command that we can create a profile.
And part of what Husseina is going through here as well relates to Meshery's sibling project, Service Mesh Performance. Recall that that's a specification project that well, I won't explain it again, but suffice to say, you can see part of Meshery's implementation of Service Mesh Performance as a project here in terms of how it defines performance profiles. And so there's some ongoing research being done in the Service Mesh Performance project. A number of, there's a little over, what is it, like 5,200 something, 5,300 something performance tests have been run to date, at least results collected in Meshery. And so we're going to be parsing through all that data and publishing. So back to Hussein.
Yeah, actually, so whatever profile, whatever performance test I have run, we can view the results. Whatever results are there, we can view it even from the CLI client. And using this command, I can trigger a performance test to hit this URL and with the load generator and with a particular service mesh, which is Istio here. So I can trigger this test and we can see the results.
Quick word of warning.
Yeah.
No,
Actually, I had to show one more part, which is Meshery CTL system login. So we'll be using 2 providers, whether Meshery provider or a non-provider. So if you use Meshery provider, whatever test we run would be persisted and we'll be able to view them again when you log in again. So I have already logged in, but I would show the command which would allow us to log into a particular provider. So we can choose either non-provider or Meshery provider. Once you choose the Meshery provider, it would redirect us to the UI for authenticating using one of the sign-in mechanisms. I have used GitHub. So yeah, we can close the window. So I have run this performance test already using the Meshery provider. So this new test results would also be shown here. So let me results test. Yeah, so earlier it was only one result. I believe this is a small bug. We have 2 results now. So we can also view the results from the CLI client as well. I think I used test profile here. So we have these two results here. So, and as Navendu had mentioned, we can even compare the results using this option. Yeah, basically a lot of these things, whatever you can do from UI, can also be done using Meshery CTL CLI client. That's about it.
Nice. Good. Well, I wonder if I might share some more things about service mesh patterns, the way that you can configure, like, can I do advanced configuration of service meshes using Meshery UI? So I am, let me back up just a bit. So I'm just running Meshery locally. And yep, I'm running Docker desktop. Meshery is able to connect to it. Although I just turned this on, and so it may not be, Mesh Sync may not have run fully just yet, which it looks like it isn't. It looks like it's not necessarily speaking to Kubernetes fully, so we're gonna have to wait just a moment. But there's a couple of ways in which you can configure your service mesh. So one of those is to do so using a form-based system. So this concept that we were talking about patterns earlier, you can import these patterns and apply these patterns. Currently, you can then take those patterns and either start from scratch and design your own, or take an existing pattern and augment it, change it. There's a lot of patterns in this system. This is kind of a test system that has a lot of the untitled designs or patterns that aren't really there. I'm just going to grab this one. It's about, I think it probably, I mean, if its name is correct, it describes a deployment of book info, the sample app from Istio that also has a circuit breaker configured. And so the way that Meshery stores and applies this configuration is in a YAML-based format. This is the pattern file format we're looking at. You could use this relatively simple user interface to choose your service mesh of choice and what version of that mesh you're looking to interact with and use, maybe a late version. And then based on the custom resources that are available in that particular mesh for that specific version, you can then go through and use this configurator to define your, in this case, your authorization policy, particular rules about where messages are coming from and going to. And so you can use this form-based flow to configure your mesh. If we, as you do so, you'll end up seeing that, you'll end up seeing your configuration created over here. This is a beta feature. So the UX is in need of improvement. So, all feedback is welcome here. Meshery itself, by the way, is currently in its V.5 release. So it's about halfway to its 1.0. So there's a few areas still being worked through. That same concept of like configuring your service mesh and whatever version of that mesh that you want to work with applies here in this in MeshMap. This is a plugin to Meshery. It's a visual designer in which you can go about configuring your mesh. So if you have a particular application or a service that you're running, I don't know. And as you go to configure the mesh, so this is probably really, it's just some random example of taking like a particular service getting it adjoined to something like a circuit breaker, if you're going to deploy this on Kuma, and kind of visually designing out the fact that you're pulling in and visually design what it is you want for your mesh to do. So maybe these are like 3 versions of the same service, and you're wanting to have a circuit breaker from the first part of that service over to the remainder of these that you want to have a circuit breaker over, and so on, or whatever that configuration is. I should probably have a better example just offhand, but the point is, like, there's a lot of ways to configure each and every mesh, and each and every mesh at a particular version. So someone had asked a great question earlier about, Meshery's support for different types of data planes, different CNIs, different data plane implementations. And it's like, looking at this, you might begin to get a sense of, more or less what the answer that I was giving, which is like, there's a lot of different service meshes supported at different versions. And we don't nearly have enough maintainer fingers to have typed out all that code. So the support for these different meshes is now, Meshery self-generates these. It introspects each of the meshes programmatically, and then generates these components that you can use to design your service mesh configuration. You can then save those designs, apply those designs, deploy them. This particular plugin, outside of it being a designer, it also over something of a visualizer. So I need to refresh my environment, but if I had a service mesh deployed, we would see its deployment here. We can go about interacting with it. And so there's kind of a difference between these 2 modes. This is more of a view mode, where you would observe what's going on your active infrastructure. And then over here, where you're designing patterns, maybe you're working with filters as well, WebAssembly filters. You do the design here and then watch it run over there. So. Good. So who did I confuse, and who's got questions? Who wants to talk about roadmap? Or so we said Meshery is at its v0.5 release right now. It's about to release the .6 release. We're almost there. As such, there's active discussions and assignments and design specs and happening for the .7 release. This is all open to you all to go jump into, explore, ask questions around, use, contribute to, influence, all that. I think your best point of reference is probably just going to meshery.io, and then you'll find links to a variety of things. Questions? There's a few things that are going to come out in .7 as we look forward. So you all saw a demonstration of some of the ways in which you can visually assess the performance of your mesh. Meshery is opinionated about bringing back certain measurements, measuring certain things. Well, in the next release, Meshery will continue to be opinionated, but it'll also be fairly configurable in terms of what metrics or what telemetric signals it is that you want to look at, whether that's logs or metrics or traces. Meshery actively lets you expose the logs of any of your service mesh components, and more than just your service mesh components, like Meshery will expose the logs of any of the pods that you're running in Kubernetes as well. And so part of next release will be a focus on allowing users to customize their telemetry, the way that they're viewing their telemetry. If you're just learning, like the Meshery community, the Layer 5 community, it's a great one to jump into. We're all just learning. So people ask silly questions all the time. I do. And I think it's in part because of that culture and the way that we're collectively learning, uplifting each other, and creating some pretty cool things, I think. Meshery turns out to be the most popular Linux Foundation internship program, or the project that has the most popular internship program, more than Kubernetes even. So Asuko and Piyush, things that we kind of missed out on or maybe didn't let people know about that come to mind for you. And questions that we didn't answer. Now's your chance to get in a pot shot, like ask a super tough question, embarrass me, embarrass anybody else on the panel. Okay, so good. So as we go to wrap, don't be shy. Please jump into the community. Please come give feedback. All complaints are welcome, and all compliments are welcome as well. So with that, yeah, it's meshery.io. You know, go check it out. And Huseina Navendu, Asuko Piyush, thank you very much for getting up either very early, or in Asuko's case, just having a casual day, I suppose, and joining and sharing today. So we'll have the Service Mesh Performance Project, Service Mesh Performance Project hours coming up. So there'll be a few folks from Intel, maybe a Red Hatter, and some HashiCorp folks joining as well. So all right. Okay, thank you all. See you at KubeCon. See you around in Slack.
Thank you. Bye.